Great, thank you. Thanks very much, Sarah. Well, hi, colleagues, and good afternoon. I'm James Bullion, partner member of the ICB. Welcome to the Integrated Care Primary Care Commissioning Committee meeting. And we are being recorded, as you probably already know. And after this meeting's end, this will be posted on YouTube. So we're not live streaming, but we will be in the public domain, and we are in the public domain for the purposes of the meeting. So thanks and welcome. I suppose I should just start and say I am your new chair as of the ICB meeting of the 1st of July. So it's great to meet you and to be working with you again and working with primary care colleagues again. In case you don't know who on earth I am, other than being the LA member of the partner member of the ICB, I'm also during the day the Director of Adult Social Services for Norfolk, and I've been working here for 5 years. And for a couple of those years, I was also chairing a primary and community group within the STP and ICS system. And I'm very passionate about both primary care, social work and community work. And so it's great to be offered this opportunity to become your chair. I'm very grateful to the previous chair as well, Tom Storis. I hope you'll treat me, though, with kid gloves to some degree as I get myself used to this process and used to the meeting and the names in the meeting. And I know this is our first formal meeting under the ICB as well. So I can see on the emails that there's been lots of toing and froing of getting the agenda straight and getting the right people in the room for all of that. We won't be using the chat in the meeting today because this is a formal committee meeting and a meeting that the public have access to on YouTube, so we won't be using the chat at all. So if you need to speak, you need to raise your hand or indicate so that I can see that at the appropriate time. And it'd be great if everyone could go on mute until they are speaking or participating in the meeting. We've got a lot on our agenda in terms of part 1 and part 2. So hopefully the report writers and authors can be, can assume that we've all read the paperwork and also try and be relatively brief in our introductions. So I hope that's clear, but is there anything I've forgotten to add from either your point of view, Sarah, or yours, Mark?
I think we're all good from my point of view, thank you.
Great, and I can see you're indicating positively as well, Mark. So we'll press on then. Thank you. Should we start with apologies from absence? I think I know that Trish Dorsey's not appearing, but we've got Chris Turner for Trish. Do we have any other apologies, Sarah?
Sadie Parker.
Oh, Sadie Parker. Yes, Sadie Parker's on annual leave. That's right. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. Item 3 is our declarations of interest, and I think we've got attached to our paperwork the current declarations as they stand. But has anyone got anything they wish to raise or any amendments? I think I see an email from Rosemary. Is Rosemary with us? You are. Yes, go ahead, Rosemary.
Hello, James. Yes, I am. I did send one through to say that I am actually going to be doing some sort of consultancy work with ACL Medical Practice, just helping out their practice manager there. So I have sort of started doing that now. So that will need to be added to my of interest. But I did send an email about that, so that should be picked up.
You did, yeah, duly noted in the meeting. Thank you very much for doing that. So we'll move on then to the first sort of business section of the items. So the next is item 4, which is a review of the minutes and the action log. I don't know how you normally do this, whether you go through the minutes. Don't normally do that in committees myself, but is there anything that you want to raise about those, Sarah?
No, we just normally ask people to pick up any amendments and also just quickly whiz through the actions. The only other point I have to raise is Hilary Burns' declaration of interest is outstanding, and I'm waiting for that to come through. I think we've already got it.
Great, thank you very much. Hilary, were you about to say that, were you?
Yeah, I was trying to put my hand up just to say that I have sent it through. It's not changed since previous ones, but I did have a look at the paperwork and noticed it was missing. So obviously I'm a GP in Attleborough, and yeah, usual declarations of interest associated with that.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Okay, so we'll move on then to the minutes then. So I think I won't go through them page by. Well, I will highlight page by page then. Does anyone want to raise any matters arising or matters of accuracy on the minutes? So if we start on the first page, or this page 2, which is page 5 of your pack, page 3, and page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, which is page 10 of your pack, or page 8. So with your agreement then, we'll agree those as an accurate. Oh, Mel.
Sorry, there's
Okay.
a reference to on page 9, item 8 of the minutes. It references Wentham Park. It's actually Wentham Valley Surgery.
Thank you very much. Well spotted. Thank you, Mel. We'll amend that. With that amendment, then, can we agree those as a record of the last meeting? Great, thank you very much. In terms of matters arising, then, so if I'm reading this right, Sarah and Mark, I think all these items are closed. So, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely, James. So I think so. So it's just on the action log, the 4 actions listed there. There's 3 closed and 1 just around the financial implications needed. So that's action number 0109, but that's in progress still. So we will hopefully have closed that to the next meeting. But I think all are in hand. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Noted. So that takes us on to the next item, which is our terms of reference here for our first meeting. You may in previous meetings looked at drafts of these in the past, I'm not sure. I'll take guidance from Mark on this, but so far as I could see, these look like straightforward terms of reference, which we just need to note as for agreement. Any comments on them? Amanda?
Chair, thank you. I was just going to say that these are for noting. They have been approved by the board. They were approved by the board on the 1st of July. And the terms of reference are set out in the governance handbook, which is published on the website. They are for noting, and this will give the committee a few months opportunity to review them, to see how they're working, and then there is an opportunity to revise and update them and present them to the board. And we were planning or thinking about a January board to review the terms of reference if there are any amendments required.
Sorry, Amanda, and the meeting. I just had a glitch on my system there just for about 9 or 10 seconds. So I do apologise. I missed that point, Amanda, but I won't make you repeat it. It sounds like you had resolved whatever you had said.
Thank you.
Is that right? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so can we agree those terms of reference then for the meeting?
James, I've got
Great,
my
thank
hand
you.
up. Sorry, James. I had my hand up. We have submitted additional comments on the tour. Fiona, you responded to a comment we made earlier around, so there are still outstanding comments from the LMC on it that we're expecting a response on. And one of the key points was, oh, James is obviously having problems, was around the notification of the meeting and getting all the papers, because it's been changed from 7 working days to 5 days. It doesn't even say working days, which I don't think is going to give people enough time to read 500 odd pages as it can be sometimes. So I do think we need to look at when we're getting them and how soon we can get the papers, etc. out. And obviously I've noted today there was an inclusion in the, although items were taken off part 2, there was a lengthy inclusion, and that's very difficult for members to be reading. when there's amendments, even on the day of the meeting. And the comments we've put through is it doesn't really enable members or attendees to provide constructive input into the meeting.
Thank you, Mel. We're back in the meeting now, hopefully. Sarah, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, sorry, part 2. I've been on leave, so I think that's the paper that Mel's referencing to, and that's completely and utterly my fault, so I apologise for that.
Thanks, Sarah. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying there, but I take the general point that Mel's making about timeliness of papers, really, and the length of the papers in the meeting. We do need to, don't we, heed that so that members can read the papers in good time. And obviously we'll try and compensate for items of leave and for changes. I guess as this is our first formal meeting, we're going to have a little bit of chopping and changing about, since the ICB itself is also bedding itself in, isn't it, in terms of processes. So we'll try and be understanding of one another, as it were, as we go along, perhaps. Okay, so the next item on here is the forward plan. And again, that's for noting. Has anyone got any, again, straightforward, just patterning out our year, isn't it, in terms of what's on the agenda? Any other comments on that? If not, we'll move straight along. Thank you very much. And then item 7 is the risk register. And again, this is for noting. There's a fair bit of detail on this, taking us through the risks and the ratings of them. Do we... I'm getting feedback on my mic now. I'm having a bad tech day. I apologise. Do we need any further discussion on that, Mark?
Thank you, James. It'd just be helpful if Shepherd were able just to, if there are any key areas of concern, just be useful, I think, for the committee just to be cited on those. I know the report will be taken as read, but I think Shepherd, if you're happy to just kind of update on any specific areas of concern that you'd like to flag to the committee, and I see there are hands up and questions as well. So if that's okay, James, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Shepherd.
Thank you. Just to confirm that we've got 10 risks on the register, and one of them is rated as red. There have been some changes since last month. We'll draw your attention to those changes. So PC11 was previously reported as red, but now has changed to an amber rating. So there's a reduction in the risk there. And we have a paper coming through around that risk in terms of the interface working. Then we have PC13. For PC13, really, it's around the resilience around the general practice. And it's just to note the emerging kind of feedback that is coming through in terms of staff sicknesses, and also to just note for us to continue to monitor that. There is a recommendation to combine PC13 and PC14 because they are related in terms of staffing. Then just to go back to PC9, which is the red rag rated, which is around the hypnotics and anxiolytics. I think it's good to see that there is a positive downward trend in terms of that risk, but still remains as red. The final change that we have seen is around the learning disabilities and autism, which has featured consistently for the last 6 months. And that risk has now been reduced to amber, and we are on track around our national targets and also our local ambitions. So that is, I think that's all I would like to say on the risk.
Great, thanks, Shepherd. That's really helpful. So we make sure we come back to those, particularly the merger suggestion. So should we take the comments and questions then? So first is Hein. If I get your name pronounced wrong, Hein, do let me know.
Yeah, no, I listened to many variants, but this works very good. I had 2 comments. PC15, so that has to do with the Wave 4B. We agreed in the last commissioning committee to keep that at a high risk score at a red until we get hopefully the approval in September from NHSE. So my request is that can be retained at a red. And my second comment is around PC 16, and we'll come to that shortly in the agenda around the SME reviews or SMI reviews, health checks. I think the risk score probably needs to be upped given where we are in the process, but maybe we can circle back to that when we have discussed item 8 on the agenda. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Certainly will do. Make sure we pick that up there. Hilary?
Hi, thank you. I wanted to just ask a bit more about PC1 as a risk, because it says that it relates to lack of general practice GPs and nurse workforce, and yet the controls that are in place seem to relate a lot to workforce plans, training hubs, that kind of thing, which relate more to the nurse workforce. They wouldn't really impact on GP recruitment. I'm sure you've all heard recent news about quite scary figures about how many GPs plan to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm not sure, it doesn't feel like we're doing enough. It feels like we're walking into a real crisis in the future. It's already very hard to recruit GPs in this area. And it just feels like maybe we should be being, I don't know, I didn't read that and feel great, that's all in hand. I'm still very worried about it.
Thank you. Thanks, Hilary. So I'll come back to these as we go through them, but I'll take the other two comments and then make sure we discuss them. Mel.
Hi, can I just ask a question, James? We've got quite some significant comments on a couple of the risk register papers that are also covered on the agenda. So would you prefer that those particular ones I raise under the agenda item, but they also need to be reflected in the papers of the risk register?
Yeah, I think that would be preferable to have the discussion once and in the substantive discussion, and then we'll make sure we refer back to the risks if Shepherd could catch you those. We go along.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So I've just got a couple of comments, just to pick up on Hilary's comment there on PC1, just to mention that we are doing some work with the practices to identify actual GP numbers working in general practice in Norfolk and Waveney, because we do hold all of that data as well as all of the locum data, which obviously nobody else has locum data. And so I would hope that we'd be in a position to share actual figures, really accurate figures of where we are, because I can certainly say that when I started with the LMC in 2015, we had almost 1,200 GPs on our databases working in Norfolk and Waveney, and certainly the HOSC paper reflected just over 500. So that's in a very short period of time. But if it's helpful, we're obviously going to share that information with the CCG. The second one, I just wanted to make a comment on PC 11, which is regarding primary care and other providers interface. And just wanted to say that the paper could be read that currently the shift of work is being accepted by GPs, which is, you know, those of us in the room know that that isn't actually the case. So I think the risks are already occurring, but the paper seems to reference that they could occur. So I just think that needs to be just amended on the sort of focus of that slightly, if that were at all possible.
Yep, lots of nods there. Thanks, Mel. Okay, Fiona.
I was just going to respond to Hilary's comments around the two PC risks related to workforce, if that's okay. So up until the end of June, we had just one risk for the whole of the workforce. And we've realised over the past few months that actually there are very different challenges for GPs and nurses versus the allied health professionals, including the ARS roles. So we've separated them out this month. We still need to do some work on them to put more detail into the both of those risks. I fully acknowledge what you're saying about the GPs and nurses. I think I suppose it's a balance between having too many risks and managing them, or trying to streamline the process. But once we populate the GP and nurse one, I'm happy to sort of reflect on whether it should be again further split out, taking advice from colleagues in the ICS workforce team.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds very helpful, Fiona. Getting nods there. Shepard, did you want to come back on any of the detail of the comments? Be particularly interested to hear on the recruitment one that we've just sort of touched on, about whether you feel there's just work to be done in the background there with the workforce group, or whether we need to do anything more active to make sure that risk is addressed.
I'll probably want to take it outside here to explore a bit more, because certainly I share the view that there are significant challenges in our system. There's a lot that is being done, and there's still more to be done. So I know Fiona leads on that. And so, yes, I would probably want to have further conversations with our colleagues internally to see whether there's more that we could do. And welcome other thoughts from colleagues, I think, from the committee, if they feel there's other things that we could explore more.
Right, okay. And just rolling back to what you suggested about PC 13 and 14 and merging both the resilience issue and the sort of COVID issue. Are we comfortable to do that? Is that okay with the group? Was that what you were asking, Shepard? They are very similar, but obviously one is quite distinct in terms of living with COVID and its impact. So I suppose we just need to make sure we capture the COVID issues in the resilience one accurately, it seems to me, if those are merged. This is a novice's observation on this slightly, but I know from social services we're keeping a close handle on the impact of COVID, because obviously it's an important part of the public narrative about why things are happening that are either positive or negative. But are you asking for a merger, or telling us, advising us you're going to merge them?
We are asking for your support to merge the two.
Okay. Are we okay with that, colleagues, then? Mark?
Yes, I think so, Shepard. I know we've talked about it previously, but it's point in time as well, isn't it? So if we look at this week, the last 2 weeks, we know that all providers are really struggling. The impact of COVID has really ramped up in the last month. So I think we'll just need to keep a very live review, because yes, of course they're intrinsically linked. But so I think yes, supportive, but we may need to review that continually as we see the impact.
Right. Okay, well, in the absence of any other comments, we'll agree that and move on, if that's okay. Thank you, Shepard, for that. So we'll make sure we pick up the other items, Bill and Hein, in the relevant items. But let's move on then to the service development section. So the first paper we've got is the SMI health checks. And I'm just looking at my list about who is presenting this. Is it Julian? Do we have Julian with us?
Like, he hasn't joined yet.
Am I ahead of time? You will notice I'm not a particularly brilliant chair when it comes to the detail of making sure I'm on time. Obviously, the public now know that. So, Mel, should we over to you, Mel?
Would it be helpful if I raised our comments prior to the paper being discussed elsewhere, then, rather than wait on this item?
Will we need Julian for that discussion, Mel, from your perspective?
Possibly would be helpful, but we have written most of them to him.
Okay, well, why don't you, oh, sorry, Shepard, do you want to come in first?
I was going to ask if it's okay to do the LD paper, then come back to the SMI.
I was going to suggest that very thing, so you've anticipated me. So yeah, let's do that way round, because that's yourself, Shepard, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you.
Fire away.
So the committee is being asked to note the priority for Q1 and Q2, that is to reach out to all the individuals that did not receive the annual health checks. Also to note the content of the WASC paper that is in the appendix. So we continue to make very good progress around the annual health checks for people with a learning disability. And I'm really pleased that we are on track towards our local and national ambition for this year. To support that mission, we have additional resources in place, and this is not the first time some of the committee members are hearing this. We have Protect Now, that is supporting practices in Great Yarmouth and Waveney. A point just to mention, we have paused Protect Now as of the 1st of July while we renew the arrangements and going through the governance arrangements around the information governance for that. But we are very positive that we'll get the arrangement going again. Then I think I just want to appreciate the peripatetic team that is led by our quality team in terms of actually focusing on quality and supporting practices to enhance the quality of annual health checks that are being done. And the focus for that resource at the moment is in the south of Norfolk. And also, I think another appreciation that I would like to extend is to Fens and Breaks, PCN, that are hosting a clinical resource to actually help practices to carry out the checks for patients. Then also some work has started with a clinical independent provider. The first surgery has been done, and there are sets of dates that have been put for practices to access those resources if they feel appropriate that they need additional support. The final comment I would make is a way of reiterating the national request around that prioritization for Q1 and Q2. We have written out to all our practices in our system to find out about their plans to be able to reach out to those families for the Q1 and Q2. And we've had a response from about 50% of the practices have responded to say we have plans or we need additional help. So of those 48 practices, 11 of them, they've asked to say, can we have additional support to be able to deliver on this? We are working with our locality, I was going to say our ICB localities on the remaining 50% to get those responses. We've had meetings to focus on that. So in a nutshell, we're very positive, I think, across our system that the focus that we are putting on learning disabilities is the right one, and we can only continue to improve the outcomes for this population. I'll stop for any questions or any remarks.
Thanks very much, Shepard. That's really clear, and the paper is really clear, and it does seem to be, colleagues, on the surface of it, a positive move in the right direction here, although still further to go. And I suppose the pandemic has highlighted the inequalities experienced in terms of outcomes by learning disabled people. So comments and questions then. Mel first.
Yeah, sorry, you're going to get a lot of this today. So first of all, just obviously supporting, and we understand, the rationale behind, the paper and all the work that the former CCG and now ICB will be doing. But we do, obviously, our perspective is to support, and our remit is to support general practice and to ensure that contractually, they're not being asked to do anything outside of their contract, and that in terms of any contracts that they are working to, that they have equity of access and resource. And we do want to pick up a couple of things surrounding this risk and the agenda item. And Shepard, I know Nikki emailed you directly, so you've covered regarding the issue around Protect Now, now that the COPE notice ceased at the end of June. So please and welcome the pause on that until that's rectified. And we've raised it a number of times before, and I'm afraid due to how the papers are continue to be written, we do need to raise again, particularly as this is a new meeting and particularly as it's a public meeting, that the PCCC does need to be mindful that any targets referenced are former CCG and ICS targets, not practice targets, and practices are doing their level best to achieve these targets. Any achievement within QOF or the DES are voluntary for practices. We're therefore not sure where the reference is in the risk paper to the being a 75% target for practices under the DES, or it seems to infer that target is for practices under the DES. And we would ask that all papers relating to LD are amended to ensure that this is made clear. There's also reference to additional support for some practices that you've referenced, Shepherd, but again, as this is a contract, there needs to be equity of access to any additional resources that the ICS and former CCG are providing to practices under any DES, LCS or any other contract. And we're unclear, this hasn't been discussed with the LMC, so we're unclear how this is going to ensure equity of access and also ensure equity of funding, because where practices receive additional resources and their achievement increases, their funding will increase. And that appears to be inequitable. So we do need to have a further conversation around that and to ensure equity for all 105 practices.
Great, thank you, Mel. What I might do, I think, is pick up those two technical questions first and then come back to the other comments, unless people say to me that they've got an observation on the technical thing that's just been asked there. I'll assume not. Shepherd, on those 2 points then around the, as it were, the official nature of the target and the ICB, as it were, either adopting, I presume, or making a decision through its other committees. Do you have an observation on that first, and then the contractual point that Mel is raising?
Absolutely. I think I'll probably answer it in 3 ways. The first part, I think I want to emphasize the absolute commitment for the outcomes for the people with the learning disabilities. And I do recognize some of the tensions that can exist because of that outreach focus that we need to do. We are absolutely wanting to see a change to improve the quality of life for those families. And the contract will be used to support that. And practices, it's voluntary for them, and they're exercising that option. Some practices have said they don't need additional support. The offer is there for any practice that is willing to improve the outcomes of their population, and it's not forced on them. They will have to work with those additional resources as a voluntary exercise rather than actually, it's not being imposed. I appreciate that the paperwork that may have been submitted may be read as this is forced upon practices, but absolutely not. That is not our approach. And also, to be absolutely clear, the contract between the CCG and the practices is that of equal partners. We don't have the power to force the practices to act. They're equal partners to the contract. So I think this provides an opportunity for equal partners, that is the practices, to have a conversation with the ICB. So I think that is the message I would like probably to respond to all those things. But I think more importantly, I think for me, there is further work that we would need to continue to do with LMC colleagues before we come to this committee. I would like to be able to, in future, to come to this committee with some agreements on where those tensions are, and also to be clear about where we are disagreeing. But the way I read it is we are absolutely all together wanting to see an improvement in the way we deliver the outcomes for this population.
Right, thank you, Shepherd. That's really clear as well. Mel, did you want to come back on those points before I bring Bill and Chris in?
Yeah, sure, thank you. And Shepherd, yes, we have discussed, the LD delivery in some detail in our weekly meetings, but I think I'm not sure if you've slightly missed a point. We're not saying that it's being forced on practices. We're saying there's a lack of equity of access, and if practices are already doing the work themselves, any practice who receives additional support, and that's not been evidenced as to why that's needed, you know, there, and my comments are going to be reflected in the SMI item when we come to it as well.
Yeah.
But I think
Okay.
we need further discussion around where the ICS or ICB, former CCG, is going to provide additional resources to deliver something that's under a contract. That needs to be fully discussed with the LMC prior, as you've highlighted, to it coming to this meeting and to anything taking place, because what we can't have is any inequity across our 105 practices. You know, where there's pilots, that needs to be mitigated. But you're absolutely right, we're all on the same page that we want quality health checks for all patients, regardless of what the type is. But it's how we do that and how resources are used to support practices in doing that, and making sure that there is equity in access of those, because I'm assuming where somebody else does this health check, the practice is still going to receive the payment.
That sounds well. So I think, Mel, that's really helpful, and the dialogue between yourself and Shepard there sounds like it does need to. It sounds like we're all agreeing on the need for, as it were, coming to this meeting with a sort of pre-conversation, so that we're understanding the kind of nature of what has been agreed and what the expectations are. I think
Yeah, absolutely, James.
that covers
Thank
that. Yeah. So, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. It's very interesting listening to this, because I mean, I think this got this extra focus because of the statistics that some practices were doing more health checks than others, and the system, as enough was agreed, was not doing enough. So I mean, you know, I appreciate the contractual discussions, but I think the key thing that I was very keen that we shouldn't lose sight of is that these health checks weren't happening, and they needed to happen, and we were not doing as many as our benchmarked other systems were doing, and that is why it keeps coming to this forum. And I would like to congratulate Shepard and his team for everything they've done, because I think we've made a dramatic difference on an indicator that had stubbornly refused to move for quite a long time. And I think we mustn't forget that. And you know, we weren't having performance that was equal across all the practices. So it was thought that some would need more help in order to get their performance to the level of the others. And you know, I'm just very keen that this very vulnerable group of people were getting the health checks that they needed, because we could all see that their outcomes were much worse than the population generally. And I think that's the one thing I didn't want to lose sight of, and I want to congratulate Shepard and his team.
Thank you, Bill. Sorry, I muted myself there. Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I'd agree with everything that Bill's just said there. Just in relation to the additional nursing and clinical support, Shepard, is that in place just till the end of September, or is there a potential that could be extended if it needs to be? I don't know if you know the answer to that just yet or not.
Okay, so there is a paper in the background that will be going to EMT. So I'm kind of preempting some of that, to see if those resources could be extended.
Great, thank you.
Right, thank you. Well, thanks all. So we note the progress, and we'll pick up those items of discussion, Shepard, with the LMC. And unless there's any further comments, I think we'll move on. Thank you. So let's go back to item. So is Julian with us now for item?
I am indeed.
You
Hi,
are,
James.
yeah. Hi, Julian. So let's go back then to the SMI health checks. Over to you, Julian.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm here to talk to you through the latest update paper for SMI, which was submitted in time for PCCC, and effectively it follows a very similar vein of improvement that's been noted in LD, albeit with quite some way to go. I think a lot of the lessons that the LD team have inputted, some of the feedback that we received from the practices, as well as the formerly CCG locality teams, is that actually the way the improvement has been driven up month on month is something that could be replicated within the SMI. But what we've done effectively, I think it would be really interesting to understand our facts and figures before we go into what our opportunities and delivery plans are to sustain the improvement that we've noted in Q4. So essentially across the Norfolk and Waveney system, there are 9,134 patients with SMI. We have Q4 data for 21-22. We're still awaiting Q1 for this year. But effectively at the end of last year, 3,548 SMI health checks were delivered across the system against a national ambition of 5,184. That equated to, in the old performance rankings, as a system of 38.9% against 60% national target. And I think why I think that is a big achievement for the system is it shows the highest amount of health checks for SMI delivered in the last 3 years. It shows that the system is slowly recovering, but it also shows that there is a lot more work to do to make sure that this vulnerable group of patients access the SMI health checks. We spent some time also, the project group, during our monthly sessions, reflecting on the impact of COVID and some of the health inequalities seen. And I think it's very stark to see that when we review the figures for 2020 and 21, there were only 1,985 health checks done. And when you compare that to where we are now in 3,548, I think it shows that the system is recovering, but it does need some extra resource to enable the pressure to counterbalance the pressures that primary care practices seem to be undergoing. And I know, as Mel rightly said, I think there's a lot of cross challenges that could be covered between LD and SMI, but I wanted to draw some attention to section 3 of the paper, which was the opportunities to drive service improvements. And I think we focused on several, which we think will make a difference. And this is working in close collaboration with our locality colleagues as well as primary care colleagues. But I think the first one is we acknowledge that in order to try and test new approaches, we needed to reach out to other locality systems and healthcare CCGs to see what they were doing and why they were performing better than we were here in Norfolk and Waveney. And the most common trend that seemed to come across everyone was twofold. It was number one, make every patient visit count to a primary care practice. And number two, it was the so what behind the check. So once the healthcare check is delivered, what are we doing to ensure quality of care to our patients? Are we providing anti-smoking cessation advice, dietary lifestyle? Are we driving up patient and peer engagement and support? And the answer was varied across the system. So I think number one, what we would like to do is recognize the system-wide inequalities and put up an action plan to come back behind it. We're working quite closely with our partners in NSFT and secondary care to make sure that the entire patient pathway is recognized, not just the primary care aspect. And I think we also recognize that we do need to test out new methods of delivery, and I would welcome this chat with Shepard as well as Mel, so we can look at SMI and LD as a whole. But effectively, looking at the lessons learned within the LD project work and how drastically their position has improved, it's the view of the team that primary care could use some additional support and proof of concepts to deliver that. Specifically, two main ones. I think we would like to trial a peripatetic team that would actually be in addition to primary care practice staff who would deliver the checks on behalf of the practice. I will put a caveat behind that, taking into account Mel's previous point that there is a issue around the funding and who gets what, but that's our thinking. And I think the second one is to trial out some new proof of concepts and pilots around point of care testing. And this is to drive up the obtaining of bloods outside of hours for patients who might struggle to come into GP practices. Could we facilitate and work around our patients? Two more points before I wrap up and take any more questions. I think there is an acknowledgement that we are some ways from achieving our national targets, but at the same time, there's acknowledgement of the pressure primary care practices are going under, and to achieve our highest performance in checks done across the system is testament to how much primary care is working. But I think by helping them to, number one, understand the data, help with coordination and booking, and work alongside some charities that we are in partnership with, and finally, by doing some pilots within this year, I would like to hopefully have a similar success story that LD has had. So I'll stop there for a breath and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Julian. That was a real rush through there and very clear, and certainly showing the degree of the ambition needed. They are challenging numbers, aren't they? And given the context for our mental health services, of course, it's even more critical in that sense, isn't it? About what's happening in primary care versus the referrals into secondary services. So first I've got Mel and then Hein. Mel.
Okay. Thank you, James. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The reference there to NSFT and Julian, yes, obviously coming in on the back of the LD comments, which, I won't reiterate, but obviously are replicated around the SMI papers. And again, just something I just wanted to mention, particularly in relation to the risk paper. It's not clear the figures and the data that's used, whether that is purely general practice data. And I do think some of these papers are lacking information on the secondary care provider data, which I appreciate this is a primary care commissioning committee, but actually you can't look at these, the former CCG, now ICS targets of 60%, which again, that's not reflected. We've just done the LCS review. There is no target in the LCS for general practice to deliver. That's not taking away the ambition, which we all want, but perhaps an opportunity was missed there without putting a target into the actual LCS. But I think, again, throughout these papers, it would be really helpful if more information was given so that it gave a clearer picture of where both types of provider are on delivery. So because it's not clear at the moment where the real issues are. And if I, use an example without going into detail or mentioning the patient group, the CCG themselves allowed our secondary care provider to cease annual reviews for a significant number of patients on their books with no backup throughout 2021. If the same went for this, perhaps it's affecting data. So I think I would ask for more detail within both the risk paper and the actual paper around delivery by the different provider groups. Yes, you've picked up on the issues around how resources, and don't get me wrong, we are not saying don't give practices additional resources. They're always welcome, but they need to be equitable and access needs to be equitable for all practices. And the other item I just wanted to mention, Julian, was around the letter that's written into the risk papers. And obviously we've sent comments back to you on that and are awaiting a response on that.
Great.
Yes.
Do you want to come back on those points, Julian?
Yes, if I could just pick up that last point, Mel. Yes, so the letter is still in my inbox, and I must admit, I will get back to you at least by close of play tomorrow. And I think I will make it quite clear the resources rather than everything else that the practices do know. And I will take it as an action to go back and review the risk as well as this paper and be a little bit more clear on my data and where the information is and what's coming out of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's very helpful. Hein.
Thanks, James. Julian, many thanks for that. And I agree, I think there's a lot that can be learned from the LD approach. I had a few points. The note focuses very much on the target and how to achieve it. I would promote that we also, like LD, make sure we reach everyone ultimately, because otherwise there might be a group of 1,000, 2,000 people who never may see a test whilst we still hit the target, if that makes sense. You touched on funding, so I know you gave an update 2 months ago to the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, and the committee asked for more details. So when do you think you'll have a sort of fleshed out proposal of what funding needs you are looking for? And lastly, circling back, like Mel, to the risk, I feel it warrants a higher risk score. I think it also would promote sort of a higher emphasis the committee can place on it, but I'll leave that with you and Mark what wisdom is, but that's my input. Thanks.
Thanks, Hein. And Chris?
Thanks, James. Just an observation, really, just really pleased to see that focusing on the quality of the check itself and the opportunity then to follow up with this cohort around the actual outcomes. later on down the line as a result of the quality of the check. So I think that's really positive.
Thank you. And I guess I'll make an observation as chair. I am the co-chair of the Mental Health Programme Board alongside Stuart. So I do, partly related to Mel's point, I do think it would be good if that programme board and this work get some joint sight actually of what's happening each side of those two lines, as it were. Because I think there's, for example, your point of care point, which is really interesting about the model, about how you might do stuff more directly with people that are in front of you. I think that's partly in the mental health program as well, that issue, isn't it? So that would be great to make those links across. Mel, is your hand up afresh?
Oh, sorry, I'll take it. No, sorry, I'll take it down.
Great. Okay. Any other observations then on the mental health checks? Anything from yourself, Julian or Shepherd, that you want to say by way of closure?
Can I just say one point from me, and it was just a response to Hein, your point around funding. I will touch base with my colleague Diane Smith, who's worked up a complete, I don't want to say a business case, but a costed out element for all of the pilots that we work through. And it's coming in from the Mental Health Commissioning Board, but I'll make sure that this forum has oversight. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's really helpful, Shepherd.
Just to say, thanks, Julian, for that. And I think the foundations are being laid. We can only improve from where we are.
Yep, good positive note to end on. Thank you. Okay, let's move on then. Thank you. Conscious of time. So item 10 is our interface update. And I've got MB by this, Mark, but I also got a note saying it might be Gina, unless I've misunderstood my note. So, Mark, is it you?
I think I can do it, and if Gina would like to add anything at the end, then she's most welcome. But yeah, I'm happy to present it, James, if that's okay. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. So I know we've had updates around the work of the clinical interface group previously, but for the new members, just a quick kind of refresh, really, that this is an important group. The work of this group is important. The role of the group is to highlight and address critical issues arising between primary and secondary care. And we've been working closely with Mel and colleagues and Wendy Outwin at the LMC, who's a member of that group. And actually, many of the issues that are being raised do relate to the phase 3 recovery work. We're all aware of the trying to recover long delays for things both in primary community and in acute care, but particularly the acute the planned care, those who are waiting exceptionally long and unreasonably long times to receive their treatment. But actually this group was formed to really tackle some of those issues, and it's a two-way thing. It's split from primary to secondary, and also an opportunity for secondary to primary care. I'll take the paper as read, but just like to highlight a few things. So we've had a change recently. Lois Taylor, who previously presented here at this committee, has sadly left the CCG, or the ICS as we are now, and so Kate Lewis has very kindly picked up the mantle. So we're driving this from a primary and community directorate now rather than a planned care. So that's just one quick update. The membership of the group is really strong and it is very good. So it's medical directors, clinical leads from all providers, or the vast majority of providers that we work with across Norfolk and Waveney and the LMC. So the paper highlights some key areas of focus for us at the moment, 3 in particular around chest x-rays, private referrals and ICE user registrations. And actually what we're looking to do is really make quite quick progress to resolve some of these issues. And Mel, your point earlier in the risk item was around that these issues are hitting us, these risks are impacting now, and we absolutely recognise that, and I completely agree. So I think it's really prudent that we take steps to address some of those. So the work outside of the interface committee now, we've established some task and finish groups. There was one earlier this week, for example, looking very specifically at private referrals and trying to streamline pathways and prevent unnecessary work. I think we got agreement at that session earlier in the week. So in terms of the risks, I'd like to raise a couple there. Firstly is around that pace. We do need to make sure that we look to agree and change pathways and processes and try and agree those with all providers and primary care colleagues in the LMC. I think we're starting to make some progress there. The risk to our patients we need to make sure that patients don't fall through the gaps in between primary and secondary, particularly given some of the changes that came about as a result of COVID and other points as well. And just the third one is around given the membership of the interface committee, it's senior, it's medical directors, clinical leads across our system. It's really important that we do focus on the most important issues at that committee, and that there is work done outside with the task and finish groups so that we can maximise the effectiveness of that. So the paper does highlight those risks, and I think we're taking steps to address them. But that's a very brief update, but very happy to answer any questions if there are any, James. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Colleagues, any questions or comments from you on this? They don't have to be. No, great. OK. Oh, no, Mel.
Sorry, Mark,
Right.
did you pick up my email I sent earlier just around the reference to QIR in the paper?
My apologies, Mel. I've been back to back today.
No, I thought you would have been.
I will seek it out. And
no, I just didn't want to hijack you. But we've just we sent Mark an email earlier just around the reference in the paper to QIRs, because that's now an obsolete reference and not one that's in place. So I've just asked if any future paper could just have that amended. That was all.
Absolutely. No, thanks, Mel. And we'll note that in the minutes as well, Sarah, if you'd be so kind as well. So yes, absolutely. And we'll feed that back to Kate and others. Thanks, Mel.
Great. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Mark. OK, let's move on then. So the next item is item 11, which is the locally commissioned services. And this, I think, is Gina.
It's me. Thanks, James. And apologies, I wasn't aware that I was linked to the previous one. So this paper has been as a kind of summary of a programme that's been running now for the last 10 months. I think many of you have been aware of the programme ongoing, so I don't want to go through it too much in detail. The proposal today was to actually use this as a final paper to wrap up the programme and to reflect on what went well and what we could learn from programmes in the future. So I won't take long, because I know you've got a very packed agenda this afternoon. The first thing I think to note is the fact that we have achieved something that's a huge challenge over the last 10 months. We've been trying to undertake this for the last 5 years from the CCG. And we were looking at how to streamline the overall 38 locally commissioned services across all 105 practices and make it into something that was consistent for patients, that meant that patients in different areas were able to access all the same services. It was no longer a postcode lottery, and that practices were remunerated in the same way for the same specifications. So that was a challenge originally. The challenges that I think we learned from, so I'm going to assume the paper's read, so I'm going to kind of evolve this conversation, is that the learnings from the programme was very much around trying to take 5 CCG's previous thinkings and make it into one consistent. Meant we did have to make a number of assumptions. We had to assume that we could look at this in relative isolation, bearing in mind that previous investments took into account things like the level of community services provided in different areas, the level of mental health investment in different areas. And therefore, when we've looked at this, when we've had to review the programme and the 38 services, some of which were decommissioned, it wasn't because they were not good projects. It was because they weren't able to be consistently rolled out across all the 105 practices. And it was also because sometimes they were put in for gaps in commissioning services. The processes we had, we agreed that everything had to be offered to everybody. So one of the learnings we've had is the fact we would like to go back at some stage and look at those areas where we have decommissioned services, and reflect on the investment in community services and mental health, of which there's been masses of change in the last 5 years. So we do need to bear that in mind, but in order to make sure patients are supported. The other elements we wanted to pick up on were the fact that in order to undertake a good patient engagement, which was one of the actions we had outstanding from the previous paper, it's very difficult to do that if our patients aren't educated what should be provided from a GP surgery. So the patient survey showed us that patients were using the survey as a way of vexing their frustration around the limited access or perceived limited access to practice during the pandemic, to the perceived frustrations of the NHS but not being able to get dental access, and to perceptions of the links to the hospital. So when we looked at the survey result, we'd hoped it can come out about local commission services and the changes to various pathways, and it actually gave us a greater understanding about how little knowledge there is about there. So one of our key learnings going forward is when we undertake future patient engagement for specific projects, we really need to look at how we can help support the patient to understand what should be delivered from a GP surgery. And I think we're working with comms on that. And I know there's a massive campaign for education for patients and locally social media around what is it we actually do. Don't judge us about what we shouldn't be doing, it's judge us about what we should be doing. The other learning, I think, and I think hopefully Mel reflects this with the local medical committee, is that although we've had to work at pace during this programme, we have worked really closely with the local medical committee, and we've identified by splitting it into operational, actually this is what we want to achieve, help us get there, was actually much better, more beneficial than this is what we've done, what's done, good or bad with it. And that's something I would really recommend going forward for any programmes that we continue. And the very final point I wanted to pick up was the programme management element. The programme management and governance of a programme is considerable, as this has been. It's succeeded because the pragmatism of both this committee and the willingness from clinicians and some of the other commissioning support teams to work with the programme at pace. But going forward, it would make it more robust if we'd actually enable to pull on the assurances of potentially some dedicated teams in order to pick up the DPIAs, the EIAs that we were doing, but we were doing at pace. So going forward, again, the recommendation would be to have a bit of a wider team than just one or two individuals. I'm sorry that's a bit of a canter through. I focused mainly on the learnings. I've glossed over the size of the programme, but ultimately we have achieved with all 12 LCSs being completely live across all 105 practices now, with the exception of the warfarin go live, which is transferring out the Jane Paget, which commences next Monday. I should pause there.
Great, thank you, Gina. Again, really clear and a really clear paper, actually. Hilary? Oh, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I'll carry on, Hilary, and I'll come back to Mel.
You sure?
Just for change. Yeah, go on.
Thank you. I think a look back would be really useful because, as Gina has mentioned, some services were decommissioned and some of those were very successful services. For example, services in preventing admissions avoidance, which given the state of our pressures on our acute services seems counterintuitive to say the least. Also, I would say, as wearing my GP hat, I think there's been a significant clinical administrative burden to the introduction of these and the review of the LCSs. So as a clinician, I spend more time now doing admin work because of this than I did before, which again seems counterintuitive given that my skill set is in dealing with patients. And I think the coding, the templates were not right. So some of the coding will be missing for part of it. So I think it would be useful to look back in the future just to see whether practices are still engaged with this or whether they've just abandoned things because it's just too much hassle, and whether they've actually carried on, bothering to provide the service essentially. So I think it would be really useful going forward.
Thanks, Hilary. Mel?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to reiterate Gina's comments that it really should not be underestimated. And I think Gina has completely glossed over the level of work that this took. The LMC was in no doubt about the level of work that would be needed by the CCG to get to where it's got to. And I genuinely think whilst it's not perfect, and it was never going to be, I think Gina deserves all the recognition that she should deservedly get, because I genuinely do not think that the CCG would have achieved its outcome without Gina. And yes, we worked with her, but I think a lot of this is just down to Gina. And just coming back on Hilary, on your point, I think if you are finding issues with admin, we'd like to hear about that because we've not heard that from any practices. And I think if there are issues with templates and there are issues that we need to know about it so that we can work with the ICS now to get things changed, because that's really important. But as I said, so it's interesting to hear your perspective and really helpful, and we would welcome feedback from practices on that. But yeah, I don't want to detract because I just really wanted to say there won't be another opportunity, and I wanted to say a big thank you to Gina on behalf of all the 105 practices and all the patients in Norfolk and Waveney.
Thanks very much, Mel. Duly noted. Lots of electronic applause and nodding for that point for Gina. Thank you. Bill Borrett.
Yes, just on the issue of, it's important that we don't have different services, different parts, you know, that it should be equitable, and that is more important. So we'll stop providing some services in order, they might be very good because they're not available elsewhere. That worries me. And you know, I know where we are, and I'm you know, I'm not an expert in this area, but you know, the idea I thought of us moving forward with the ICS was that we would have more local variation through the place boards and the health and wellbeing partnerships, because about local solutions, you know, with primary care at the centre of it. Being driven, you know, by primary care about what's needed in this area. So, you know, I don't want to, you know, are we saying that is going to be lost? We're heading in a different direction here with this piece of work? Because if we are, then I'd be concerned.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. It's an interesting question. See, Hillary's nodding. Mark, did your hand go up in relation to answering that? Do you want to come in on that?
It did, thank you, and thanks, Bill, and echoing Mel's comments around the work that Gina and team have done as well. So LCSs aren't the only route to deliver different ways of working. So I'm a great supporter of Place Bill. I think that there is an awful lot that we can do to tailor locally, to work with local providers, including primary care. And you know, some of the ideas that are coming forward now are around, you know, about different ways of working between. Just this week, a conversation with the Ambulance Trust, one of our PCNs in places across Norfolk and Waveney, and with the Community Trust about how can we do things differently. So I think there will be a balance, and we'll have to test it as we go through this process. You know, we're a week, 2 weeks in now to the ICS, but you know, I think it's variations on a theme. You know, ultimately we want to ensure that our patients get the right level of care and support for the population, for the communities, for the place, as well as a member of our Norfolk and Waveney system and community. So a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but no, my short answer is no. I don't think this means it's got to be done once in all areas. I think this was just trying to make sure that the services that patients receive, there is an equality there, but there is still plenty of opportunity for local design, is my personal feeling. You know, it might be good to look back in 6-12 months time and see if that's been the reality, but that's what I hope. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I guess this is our first meeting. I think the first meeting of the place boards is starting to emerge now. Did I hear Norfolk was this week? I know the LDGs have been running, and they're close to my heart, of course, but the LDGs have been running for quite a long time, haven't they? But I guess time will tell actually about the devolution and the localization of this. Gina, did you want to come in on this point? And I'll go back to Mel then.
I could, if I just pick up just a couple of points on them, if I may. First of all, just to come back, Hilary, the templates during the first quarter of the year have been challenging to undertake for both System 1 and EMIS, because as with all programmes of this size, it is until you start putting into place what you think is going to happen that you realise that everybody thinks differently. So the templates now are of a position where they should be stable. And we have made amendments for that, but it's the first time that the CCG have put out templates and reports across the board to try and ensure and support consistency. So I completely take on board what you say. We are where we are. It shouldn't be more clinically administratively heavy, and it does worry me. So please feed back examples of that so we can look at that going forward. With regards to Bill, your comment around equalisation and locality, I think one of the things to feed back on for this programme is we had 6 key principles agreed as part of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee, which we pinned the programme on, and one of them was very much a consistent range of services across all areas. And one of the other things within that was that we had to fund it fairly. Now, when you have a budget that you are looking to best utilise, but you want to utilise it in a way that practices are actually paid on a fair basis for fair delivery of actual delivery of undertaking, then it was really important that we did that based on what the provision of services were absolutely essential on a risk stratification basis, and then how to cost it up, which meant it took the actual cost of time an element to implement that. So that was kind of the basis of which we undertook the process. And part of that risk stratification was around the robustness of some of these projects. Now, when I say some of the projects were really good, my gut feeling and the gut feeling people are delivering them is that they are good. But one of the things within primary care that we do need to improve upon is our ability, as the acutes have done for many, many years, is to capture evidence and form a baseline to prove that it is doing well. So we have enabled a programme going in as part of the LCSs. It's called a Proactive Healthcare LCS. And it's utilising every area, whether it be practices, and they can combine collaboratively into PCNs or wider, to say, actually, you propose to us a project you wish to undertake with this money, invest in services. So as Hilary mentioned earlier, emissions avoidance work that's happening in the South, they were able to reuse that same work through that framework. But what we're doing is saying, create as a baseline, create a really clear reporting strategy to be able to prove, help us prove in 2 years' time that you've achieved what it is you hope to achieve, in order that we can then prove it's good and commission it across the board. So we've not thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Those projects we thought actually have got legs, and it wasn't down for us, it's down for practices to come forward to us to say, we'd like to do this. We said, yeah, fantastic. We also feel it works, but let's help you put some structure around it. Let's help you put some baseline reporting and capture your data in order to the fact that we can help you demonstrate it is doing what it needs to be doing. So I'm hoping that kind of answers the query.
Thanks, Gina. Mel, back to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Obviously, I'm here representing the local medical committee, which in turn is the statutory body representing all GPs and their practices across Norfolk and Waveney, of which there's 105. So I would just like to say that I support what Mark has said and also what Gina has said. We had to get to a basis where there was equity in provision for patients across Norfolk and Waveney in certain areas, so that there wasn't disparity there. We also had to ensure that all practices were being paid appropriately for the work that they were doing. And I can assure you there were some significant issues around that which have been addressed. But absolutely, that both our understanding is the CCG and now the ICS, and certainly from the LMC's perspective, there has to be local innovation. There has to be ability to do that. In order to do that, there needs to be the funding available, and there could have been a lot more commissioned if the funding pot was greater, but it is what it is. And there was it was within nobody's gift that I was able to speak to, or committee were able to speak to, who could get that budget increased. So I'm afraid that's probably outside of the ICS's gift at this point as well. So I think it's looking at all of the available funding streams and using any future funding in a way that can really allow that innovation and allow for local differences. But at least we have equity in services such as taking somebody's blood sample is now equitably funded, and there's equitable access for a patient regardless of where they live in Norfolk and Waveney, which was the ask of the 105 practices back in August 2017, which we asked on their behalf. So practices have got what they asked for, which I think is important to note.
Indeed. Thank you, Mel. Sue Merton.
Thank you. Yes, Sue Merton from Health Watch Suffolk. Just wanted to say that regard the enhanced patient communication plan to improve patient understanding of local health care services. I think it's be interesting for us to know further down the track, you know, what that plan is, but also to remember that Health Watch, both Suffolk and Norfolk, are there to help to promote anything and help you with that, Gina, going forward, should you need that.
Thank you, Sue. And Hilary, finally.
Yeah, I just want to say I hear everything Gina's saying, and this is not me having a go at you, Gina, personally, because I know you were given a task to do within a funding envelope, which was quite challenging. I think that was probably the fatal flaw to the programme, was that the funding envelope had to be fixed, and therefore, in order to achieve anything like equity across the practices, some services had to go. But I think it does need to, you know, what I've said is true, that a number of services have stopped because of this review, and they were predominantly around emissions avoidance, which, given how much you spend in primary care saves you considerably more in secondary care, it just seems counterintuitive. And I think probably the fatal flaw was the funding envelope agreement in the first place. Those services will not be reinstated because the transitional funding that Gina refers to is considerably less, and it's transitional. It's not, you can't employ staff on a short-term basis. So yeah, unfortunately, some of those have gone, which will only add to the pressures on the acutes, unfortunately.
Indeed, yeah. Mark, did you want to comment on that point?
Sorry, not on that point, but absolutely acknowledging what Hilary has said, and I think you know, one of the areas, if we look at the urgent emergency care data, one of the areas that we're actually doing quite well on across Norfolk and Waveney is managing the demand, and I dare say that the work that primary care done has been in no small part you know, helped deliver that. So I think the points Hilary makes are really valid, and one thing that we'll need to consider as we go forward. The point I was hoping to raise just very quickly is this will actually be Gina's last meeting, I think. So firstly, as Mel and others have done, thank you to Gina for the work she's done on this, but to say we will try and pick up the mantle as a wider team and continue on from this point forward. So just so committee members are aware, but thank you, Gina.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks on behalf of the committee then, Gina, if it's your last meeting. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks for that. It was a really good conversation in the committee there. So should we move on? I'm conscious of time. So we've now got item 12, which is the business case, the Wave 4B primary care hubs business case. And I think we've got Paul with us for this. Is that right?
Yes, hi James.
Hi,
everyone. So most of you are hopefully familiar with the Wave 4B programme, but I'll just give a brief kind of overview of where we are to date. So historically, this individual 5 CCGs, as we were at the time, were awarded £25 million capital for the development of 5 primary care hubs back in 2019. And since that date, we've obviously merged to become one single CCG and now the ICB. During that time, a programme of work was developed, which culminated in a programme business case submission to NHS England on the 1st of December 2021 for a total capital spend of 47 million, part funded by NHS capital of 25 million and topped up with 22 million of private capital investment. Upon submission, we advised in March this year that that wasn't a valid route for us, and we had to stick within the 25 million capital allocation to ensure that those assets remained in public sector ownership. So we've revised the programme, which now sees 4 hubs instead of 5, the 5 hubs, with those 4 hubs being 2 new build surgeries in Kings Lynn and Rackheath, an extension to existing premises in Sprowston in Norwich, and a refurbishment of admin space within the Thetford Healthy Living Centre to clinical space. That does mean that 2 schemes were withdrawn from the programme, which was Attleborough and the Shrubland scheme in Gorleston. Both of those schemes we're still looking to take forward via other routes, and I'd hope to say more about that next month. And I'm due to come back for quarterly estates update, so we'll be able to give some more information there. The impact of the revised programme and the build now majority being funded by NHS capital is the revenue consequences of the schemes fall significantly from £1.5 million a year to £400,000 a year. And we have submitted the revised programme business case to NHS England to start its way through with its approval journey. It's a 3-month process. We're expecting to hear the final outcome on the 19th of September for this stage, but the first formal committee that will be reviewed at is on the 25th of August. One of the things we need to do before NHS England review the document of that committee is to get formal ICB approval of the programme business case, hence we're here today. The old CCG executive approved submission of the business case to NHS England, but that wasn't a kind of governance. They didn't have the power to actually approve the whole business case as a whole. So that's all wanted to say as an introduction, but to take any questions on the business case.
Thanks very much, Paul. So thanks very much. If I understand it right, you're not therefore asking us to comment on the business case, but more seeking our formal approval, since it's been approved already by the ICS, as it were, previously. Is that right?
So,
just to clarify.
Does the CCG executive approved the document for submission, but they weren't formal approving body as such. So I'm looking for formal approval today. But yes, happy to take any questions on the content of the business case.
Well. Great. Okay, that's very helpful to know. Thank you. So first of all is Hein.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Paul. For everybody's awareness, I sent a long email with some questions and comments to Paul, none of which will stand in the way of me supporting approval for it, but maybe Paul, you and I can touch base offline on those. The one thing that I think is downplayed is I think the overall program makes much more sense compared to previous variants. So I think in that sense it's probably de-risked, but I still feel there is significant enough risk of the total sum that we will spend on this and whether we will meet it in schedule. And so I think that part of the risk feels for me somewhat downplayed. I'm still happy to provide approval from my side, but that's the only caution I would bring to the case. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll just correct Hillary's comment and Bill's, then I'll come back to you, Paul. So Hillary Byrne.
Hi, I hope you don't mind me commenting because I would have been conflicted had the Attleborough plan gone ahead, but I no longer am because we were dropped from the scheme. But I think this committee needs to be aware of some of the issues in Attleborough, and I would assume in other practices as well across the primary care kind of footprint of our area. So Attleborough was identified as the highest need area within South Norfolk. We have got 5,000 plus houses being built, some of which were already built already, and the population growth is potentially in excess of 15,000, which is not the numbers that are in this report. It says 5,800, which is considerably less than is expected. The practice was on, and the area was identified as having the greatest need and therefore was going to have a new building. And I could go into great details about how inappropriate the buildings are and lack of disabled access and all of those kind of things, but I won't bore you with all that now. But we found out in March that actually that wasn't going to go ahead, and that was, we understood. We heard about it in the EDP, which is always great, but we understood that that was because of the funding was going to be greater than 5 million envelope, which had been allocated for South. And also there was a question about delivery times. I was a little bit dismayed, I have to say, on behalf of the people of Attleborough to see that some of the schemes going ahead were £10 million or so, because we understood that was one of the reasons why our scheme had been dropped. There is currently no plan for Attleborough, and there are 5,000 houses already being built. So obviously not all today, but it is a real concern for provision of primary care services. We have, a lot of services that we cannot deliver on a face-to-face basis because we have no rooms. We have 13 clinical rooms that are of a viable size for 19,000 patients. So I would have to be really honest and say I don't recognise the numbers that are in this report. It doesn't read as my understanding, and I'm working there, as to the challenges facing Attleborough. Attleborough looks like another one practice within a whole list of practices, and I worry that there may be other people in a similar position to us. So I think this committee needs to be aware of the challenges in delivering kind of decent primary care services to its population. And I'd also just I looked at the Healthy Living Centre bid. That was built just as we started the conversation about needing a new building in Attleborough. So that was built 15 years ago, and we've been having this conversation for 15 years and we're no further on, and that's now going to be refurbished, which is a little bit concerning. But also the amount of money is £230,000 per room. So these are not new rooms. That's an existing building already standing, and this is for redesign and refurbishment. And as a taxpayer, I just think £3.6 million reorganising a building seems an awful lot of money, and I do worry if that is our greatest priority across the footprint. And when you look at other practices, not just our area, who've got similar levels of growth, you look at Humble Yard, you know, that's also in South, and other places down the A11 corridor particularly. I do really, you know, I think this committee needs to be really aware of the challenges that primary care is facing, and there is no apparent other solution coming forward as we speak.
Thanks, Hilary. What I might do actually, Paul, is to take those two items now from you, from Hein and from Hilary, and then come back to Bill afterwards, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. So in terms of pressures from other practices, so yes, Humble Yard and Attleborough are known pressure points in terms of already being constrained in future housing development in over the next 15 years. I think the difference between the numbers potentially here is the timescales, but we can go away and check that in terms of the housing growth for Attleborough. But we do recognise there is a problem for Attleborough in terms of capacity wise. The reason that Attleborough was withdrawn from the scheme, one was because of cost, but also because of timescales. The Attleborough project was a lot more complicated site than both Kings Lynn and Rathkeith, which are those similar spends. They're effectively greenfield sites, so it's a lot easier to build something in the time frames compared to the Attleborough proposal, which would have seen development, a flattening of existing premises, and then a rebuild on that site, which would have been a lot more complicated and challenging to deliver within the 2 years that we have to deliver this. So although we don't have any firm plans in place yet for Attleborough, we are committed to working with the practice, and you know, we have had a couple of meetings with you, and we have had NHS Property Services on site, and we're due to have another catch up with Lucy to go through potential short term options to help the practice. In terms of longer term, we do need to think that through further, but we recognise there is a problem there. You mentioned Humble Yard. Humble Yard, we're in discussions with South Norfolk and Borderland district councils regarding a new build facility for the practice, which the council potentially could end, if it all goes through, would end up being a landlord there, and then the practice relocating into that new build. But we're in the early stages of that kind of business case process, so there is a potential solution there. I don't know if you want to come back on that, Hilary. You put your hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Hilary.
Yeah, we've had nobody visit us from NHS Property, and that my understanding was that was about putting a modular building at the back of the practice that would have a lifespan of a maximum of 3 years with planning consent for that time. So again, you know, we really, you know, there needs to be some pace, and we're really struggling to get meetings with people and struggling to get any sense of a way forward. It feels like 1 minute we're the priority, we've got a design on paper, we've got a multidisciplinary collaborative working which would massively benefit our patients. And then because of this arbitrary political deadline of, you know, it's got to be by a certain date, it's evaporated, and the need is still there. So, you know, nothing has changed in Attleborough except that the deadline was perceived it wouldn't be met, and that just feels like a really not a great way to fund services for patients.
So all I would say is that NHS Property Services have been on site. They may not have spoken to the practice on the day that they visited, but they have been on site, and we will provide an update to Lucy, the practice manager there. We're trying to get some time in this week. I've offered up some time to Lucy to meet with her this week.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I mean, do I understand you right to say that you will you're coming back next time to discuss, was it Attleborough and Shrublands?
Yes.
I mean, should we add to that then to make sure that we bring these issues back at that time as well, following a conversation? Is that helpful to the committee to do that? I don't want to tie us up into a process we're not committed to, but it sounds like there's an issue to resolve.
We could, as part of the update, I can include where Attleborough and Humble Yard is two of the pressures. There's going to be additional state pressures across the county, so we can give an update to the committee on the whole patch, as to where the pressures are expected to be and what's happening for those for those practices.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Okay, yeah, please. And Bill, I'm so sorry, I've kept you waiting a long time there, so over to you.
No, I mean, Hilary was raising points, and mine is sort of tangential to that. It's not directly. And it's just really, I understand this is a specific project to spend some capital that we've been given by the NHS in a certain time frame, but just our ambitions wider than that is the one public estate where that I would have thought is an important project which will be key to this, where all the public sector organisations such as councils, the NHS, fire, the police, are all making their property assets available to each other so that we can then design a more efficient public estate by working together and using land and buildings that may be more needed by one bit of the public sector than the other. I know it's, I would have thought, be a key part of any strategy to deliver primary care settings across the county, and we would probably need to be referred to it as part of our going forward. And the other thing is the local councils, for example, are doing their local plans about future housing growth. And I happen to know Breckland has just submitted a call for sites, and that will be published. Those will be published later this week. So we should have, and as Hilary's already referred to it, the future demand in places like Attleborough, which is a centre for growth, and some indicative time frames. So, and also I hope that there will be money available, or a call for money available from developers and through the SIL, the Community Infrastructure Levy, to this. And my only is, in the past, health has not been, my experience has been, because I've been a councillor since 2007, so that health has not been keen to engage early with those discussions. So I think we ought to, and I might be about to be told that that's all changed, but I haven't seen it change. So I think that ought to be an ambition, certainly with primary care, because I think that we could leverage the assets of the other public sector bodies to support our ambitions in this area.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Bill. Paul, any comment on the one public estate aspect of that then, please?
The Way 4B programme is presented regularly at the One Public Estate Board, so all members of the board were given an opportunity to be part of the project. We are looking at how we can explore or exploit One Public Estate opportunities to primary care for benefit across the patch. A good example is the recent work that's happening in Taberham for a potential new facility there. But it is, you're right, historically we haven't been as proactive as we could have been in those forums, but that is a changing picture. And the same is true for planning application submissions in Section 106 and SIL funding. The CCG recognised that, and we now have a dedicated post to respond to those planning applications within the ICS estates team. I know regularly link with the planners to discuss the local plans and planning applications. So there are changes, some changes have happened, but there is more that can be done.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Paul. All right, well, let's, I mean, you're back here regularly, aren't you, with this? So I think it's for this committee, I guess, to try and track progress over this, over its lifetime, isn't it, really?
Yeah, so normally I come once a quarter to give an estates update, and in theory I wouldn't be due to come back to do another Way 4B update until we get to full business case submissions, but happy to come on an interim basis between now and then.
And I don't know what committee feel. I would feel that's quite given the frustrations in the room and the ambitions in the room. I think that would be helpful actually to come more often than that, but without obviously creating an echo chamber if there aren't things to discuss or inability to make decisions, then there's no point. But it seems to me we could try and address some of these issues and interface issues on the property side of it by having more regular conversations about it at the committee. So we'll agree that that's okay. So coming to the formal decision then, I hear what Hilary says and what Hein says about the risks, but are we as a committee then able to express support then for this? With the reservations given, obviously, about what else needs to be supported. So I'll take a lack of speaking against as agreement of the group, if that's all right. So I know we need to make it. Obviously, the ICB needs to make a decision. It can't do that. This is the proper committee to do it in. So I'll take that as agreement of the committee then. But obviously note the risks are raised by Hein and the reservations expressed by Hilary and strong reservations. But subject to those two, the committee supports, or sorry, the correct word is the committee approves the Way 4B primary care hubs business case. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
So moving on, item 13, we're a little bit behind schedule. So item 13 is the Secrecy report. I think we've got Chroma on the agenda, haven't we? Shepherd, do you want to say anything about that to us?
Just to acknowledge that Chroma has been reported for a long time on our risk register, and it's really good to see that they have got a good rating. And just to point out, I think the feedback from Secrecy, especially around the staff feeling being heard and being listened to, I think that is really beautiful to notice. Unless if there are any comments or anything from the members, then happy to answer any questions.
Great to see the good, duly noted. Thank you. Let's move on then to item 14. So we're in the finance and governance section now. So item 14 is the prescribing report. And I think, is this Jess Adcock?
Hello, yes, it is.
Hi.
Hello. So again, this report is for noting. I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have on the report. Okay, so I think Mel.
Yeah, thank you. We just wanted to highlight at the end of the report, there's a section around a QIP scheme for low risk, cost effective prescribing QIP support, which is an incentive scheme that doesn't appear to have been raised anywhere else. Joni, our lead on this, has emailed Michael Dennis directly.
Okay.
And I don't know whether you've seen sight of that and are able to answer the query, but just to be clear to the committee that any incentive scheme development has to be consulted with the LMC, and we weren't aware of this, and yet it seems to have been implemented.
Okay, I apologise, I've been on annual leave, so I'm not aware of that email, but I will go back and find out what has happened and whether I presume Michael hasn't responded yet. Is that what?
No response.
Okay.
No response yet. Obviously, we only knew about it when we read the papers.
Yep. No, that. Okay, I will investigate that for you and come back to you.
So that does, and obviously one of the other questions that we asked is, following consultation, obviously the PCCC has to agree it, and we can't see it on any previous PCCC agenda either.
Okay.
So
again, I will take that back. Thank you.
It doesn't appear that governance has been followed. Therefore, we'd like it brought back to the next meeting, please.
Okay.
Well, we can do that. Thank you, Mel. Rosemary? Yep. Rosemary Moore?
On that QIP scheme, the take-up is low, isn't it? 29 out of 105 practices. If it hasn't gone through the proper governance, I'm presuming we'll get an extension, will we, on when we can potentially sign up for it?
Yes, yeah, that is correct. I mean, that figure of 29 out of 105 practices was taken a week before the deadline for completion. So I know that there are a vast number more practices that have signed up since. But
right, but the deadline is next week, isn't it? It's my understanding.
So the deadline for accepting on the scheme was the 1st of July. The deadline for completion of the work was the end of August for the first bracket of payments. But as it's now been raised about the governance, we will be bringing this back to next month's meeting.
Okay, and you'll let the practices know that, will you?
We will do, yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Rosemary. Hilary?
I'm not a prescribing lead, you'll be glad to know, but my understanding is that in order for practices to sign up to this, they have to accept some additional software called Optimize RX, and that has concerns with some practices about slowing down the speed. I know we have massive challenges about the speed of IT and systems crashing and what have you. So if you don't sign up to having that bit, you are not able to do any of the other components of the scheme, which does seem
okay. So just to clarify to the rest of the committee, we're now talking about section 5 on the report, which is the prescribing quality scheme. Previously we were talking about the QUIP scheme. So yes, you are correct with the prescribing quality scheme. We do ask practices to sign up to be using the Optimize RX system, which alerts prescribers to the risks of prescribing and to our tag ratings for medicines across the Norfolk and Waveney area. Are you an EMIS practice, Hilary? Yeah. So we're very aware of the issues with EMIS, and Optimize RX are working with the EMIS system. I have arranged for the Optimize RX representative to meet with one of the EMIS practices in the next couple of weeks to demonstrate and look at how it's working with the system. So if you'd like me to come back to your practice, Hilary, after that has happened, then I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Jess. That's very helpful. Okay, no further comments on that. So I know what you say, Jess, about that coming back then to the next meeting of the committee.
Will do.
So thank you.
Okay.
Item 15 then is also for noting. It's our finance report, and this is James, is it?
That's correct, yes.
Hi, James.
Thank you. Hi. So as usual, I'll take the report as read, but highlight the key points to you all. So looking at, firstly at the exec summary, this report was produced in arrears due to the timing of the CCG and now ICB month ends. So it's reporting the month 2 accounts for the legacy CCG, which also includes a Q1 forecast. We can see from the exec summary that the forecast position at month 2 for primary care and prescribing budgets are now 0.1 million favourable to budget for that quarter. This position includes an efficiency target of just over £1 million built into that budget. This forms part of the 4-year efficiency requirement, which is now 8.4 million. As can be seen, these efficiencies are not phased in a linear fashion and do build up over the year. And I'll come on to the achievement of these efficiencies later in this update. So then moving on to the financial summary. This shows that GP prescribing is 0.1 million favourable to budget as at month 2 and forecast to be the same for the quarter. With these figures being 2 months in arrears, there is a marginal overvaluation of the April 22 estimate. In addition, efficiency savings have materialised in the period, allowing the forecast to be delivered. These efficiency expectations are already baked into the budget of just over £1 million requirement for the quarter. And we've only received 1 month of actual achievement, and this has over-delivered. However, this needs to be given with a slight health check that the lack of data at month 2, this could change as we go through and get subsequent months' data. There is a difference to note between the delegated primary care and system development fund of 0.5 million, which contras off. All other areas are on plan as it stands at the moment. Moving into the detailed financial analysis, this shows the key drivers behind the prescribing underspend of 0.1 million against budget and describes some of the key areas of risk that we see going forward. They're being continuous glucose monitoring and SGLT2. There's a high degree of uncertainty over the financial implications of these factors, which is why we've put them into our risks at the moment. Moving into the specific funding areas, so the SDF System Development Fund, key area of investment is showing as underspent due to being unable to move budget as at month 2 due to NHS England restrictions. This will be corrected at a later date, so it's not an underlying difference. And the same within delegated co-commissioning, the same issue causing that variance at the moment. Finally, then just moving into the risks, these have all now been refreshed for the new financial year, and the largest areas which could lead to a financial deterioration have been identified as impacts of NICE guidance. So that's the CGM and SGLT2 that we talked about before, non-delivery of the efficiencies that are baked into our budgets, and then impact of sort of nationally mandated expenditure through to the delegated co-commissioning. So that was all the areas I wanted to identify. Are there any questions?
Any questions or comments? I'm tempted to say, James, the removal of the health and social care levy may well impact on the overall budget position of the NHS, let alone primary care. So there are, as you say, some national uncertainties at the moment, but
certainly.
Any questions on the specifics or comments? No? Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you very much, James, for the report, duly noted by the committee. In terms of our agenda, we're up to any other business now. I'm advised there are no questions from the public for us to address in the meeting. So is there any other business? Bill?
Two very small point things, but I thought, as we're technically a new committee today, that it would be really helpful as a front piece to the agenda to have a list of the attendees and the organisations which they represent, because I think that would give us all a very clear picture of who everybody is and everything. And as I say, as we are a new committee, I think it would be useful. And because the agenda is 300 and whatever it is pages long, it would be really helpful on the front sheet, where we just have all the agenda items on the one page, to have the page numbers, so that one can find one's way around the agenda in a more easier way than endless scrolling. So two really small things, but I think they'll make the agenda much easier to use.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. I might add a third in the form of the PDF being itemized a bit more precisely, so we can bounce around using the technology a little bit easier. Thank you, Bill. I'm sure we can do those things subject to any rules about naming who's on the committee, but it would be really good to be more transparent, wouldn't it, with ourselves? And it certainly helped me as the new chair understand who's who and what they do as well. Mel?
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful suggestion from Bill there, because certainly looking at the list of names down, I'm not, there are a very limited number of members of the committee,
yeah,
but we seem to have an awful lot of attendees. So
yeah.
it's, I'm not even clear whether we were core or etc. So, but the other thing I just wanted to point out, and it's something that we keep referencing, and I think it's really, really crucial now that we've got an ICS, is that when we're talking about general practice, can we please use the term, whether it's written or verbal, that we say general practice, not primary care, because primary care includes optometry, dentistry, and pharmacy. And so I think we need to be really clear when we mean general practice. And if we don't get into the habit of doing that now, all hell's going to break loose come next April.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. I'm probably leading the whole committee astray, actually, with my rather generic understanding of primary and community care, and then within that, general practice and so on. So I think that's helpful, and I'll check that back at the ranch about what we should be calling ourselves and how we should be set up like that. But we'll certainly make those three changes that you and Bill have suggested. Okay, well, thank you, committee. I think that concludes our business for today in part one. Can I suggest that we convene part two in about 5 or 6 minutes, 3:25, if that's okay, and then we'll crack on. Great. Well, thanks very much for your attendance, and yeah, see you on. Thank you.